All right. This is LoopBack Maintainers call July.
And
So
thank you, Yapa, for making this happen. Thank you, Rifa, also for joining.
thank you. So
Okay, so do you have an agenda or something, or we can just pop up uh,
I don't think
anything that?
anything specific on mine. I was just wondering, like, while I was moving the meetings to Google Calendar, I saw that they offered an option to host the meeting using Google Meets or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
probably we could move the meetings to Google Meetings.
But you have to double check, for example, their recording capabilities. Do some tests on that, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I haven't used that before.
Well, let's see. I'll take a look. What are
Mhm.
the capabilities? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's feasible, and it's very nice though. Thank you to Rifa for making this calendar because right now it's more
Right.
appropriately for me at least. I can see, for example, my time and it reminds me and everything, right? It's smooth.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very good.
Great.
The calendar, hopefully in the long run, can be quite useful in like sorting things out so we don't forget, right?
Right.
Exactly. Correct. Yeah. Nice,
Also,
nice.
yeah, also the daylight savings, the time zone issues, all automatically sorted out by it. So I think that's really great.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Uh, right now I am I'm not sure if you have an agenda, Jaffa, or you know, we can bring subjects to the table.
I don't have anything specific.
Hmm.
Any one of you have anything on your mind?
Yes. At this moment, oh, sorry, Rifa. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. You can go first. Sorry.
Okay. I am really, during all these years, I haven't really used extensively the juggler, for example, and with different connectors. Even it's been quite a few weeks ago, more or less, that I was really involved on this, and I am reviewing the whole the architecture is layout from the connectors to the juggler bridge and then the real juggler, for example. What I am working right now is to have a redesign of the juggler bridge, for example, so that we can have the different connectors uh,
Mm.
being exposed an interface, right? So the juggler is exposing a contract in TypeScript, and then the connectors adhere to it. But I think, for example, that at some point, what we are lacking is that there is certain connectors, uh, the upstream connector, the Node.js package, for example, that exposes specific methods that are useful, for example, for the one that is using it. Let's say MongoDB, for example, we can actually, there is no way to interact directly to a specific methods in MongoDB connector, like, for example, let's say Pluto method, right? I like the Disney characters, like, okay, anyway. Okay. But if this Pluto method is not really in the contract in the juggler, it's not really exposed to the developer. So at some point, I'm just rethinking that part because it's not until now that I am really exposing into these things, right? Um, I understand that Rifa is working with Prisma, of course, which is I am starting reading. It's a nice solution also, but in the philosophy of the loopback that we have the juggler, the bridge, and the connectors, for example, I think that we are missing specific parts that to expose these methods, right? So if we recreate that bridge and then that bridge becomes a universal one that exposes interfaces and contracts and allows us, for example, to pass through methods directly without actually being in mediator, for example, like pass-through methods that go directly to the npm package, that would be very nice. So I'm just trying to rethink that part right now, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I've also been actually exploring Juggler as architecture myself as well. So it's more of like a personal exercise to understand how it works inside, because there isn't as much documentation as I wish there was. Uh,
Correct.
yeah, so generally, I do see quite a lot of things in Juggler kind of already been translated into Loopback 4, and there's a lot of components in Juggler that we don't use in Loopback 4. So I think you mentioned, and actually agree with your point, we need different middlemen to kind of eventually replace Juggler. But at this moment, it's kind of difficult to figure out like, okay, how do we do it in the least breaking way possible? Because the contract isn't really clear.
Correct. Correct. Exactly. Yeah. That's why, for example, we need to think it very well, right? How we can make something that is type safe, but at the same time give us the flexibility so that it's not really a major breaking change, right? Because in reality, it's just really a proxy, right? Something in the
Right.
middle that is exposing. So right
Right.
now, I am kind of like thinking that, writing a contract in the juggler, and I'm working with this MongoDB connector in the first, right? So just trying to make my first attempts to do something. In reality, I think that we need to expose methods that are available right now for not the breaking change, but also if we don't keep up the new versions of the stream connector, then we should actually have a proxy pass-through. You know, we don't double check it; it goes directly, and it's still like an anonymous function or something like that, right? That's where I think that we are really failing on that part to the developer, because what happens is that the npm package is more up to date and exposes more features that
Right.
we are not really trying, unless of course you go to the execute directly, right?
Mhm. I think um, at least in SQL, I think there's a way to execute raw SQL commands.
Correct. Yeah, the execute. Yeah, that's the execute one. Correct.
Right.
Yeah, but at some point, for example, like what I'm trying to decipher is how do you expose that upstream package method, like for example, let's say Pluto method that is only in the
Right.
npm package,
Yes. Yes.
and it's not in our contract, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you can
Right.
keep the type safety and then still yet go ahead and kind of like, for example, if the connector overrides the middleware, for example,
Mm.
the loop juggler, and
Mm.
at the VS Code, you expose that because the connector actually exposed that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
More
So
or less.
yeah, that would be a very good feature. So it would be interesting to see what's your suggestion to go about it.
Yeah, more or
Yeah.
less. I am writing a POC, right? But I'm thinking this is very hard because as Rifa mentioned, I just need to jump into the juggler. How do you make all these compositions? And also um, uh, analyzing, for example, the events. We're lacking these really events right now in the projects that I am involved. We override the repositories, for example, and create events at the repository level. But I think, and I found an example, a good example on the internet. I will share with you later in the maintenance in Slack, for example. It's nice. You expose an interface, and you can use the event emitter, for example, that uses TypeScript safe, and then the same example can be adapted to the repositories so that developers can create events before update, after update, for example, in separate files, and using annotators, it's linked automatically at the repository level. Today, what I'm doing is I'm creating methods inside the repository level. So I'm not using the observer from the data source, but just
Mm-hmm.
overwriting the method. So before update, so I'm placing my logic there, right? And it's working more or less. But I think that this example that I saw for events it's very nice in TypeScript. Also, something that we're lacking at the repository level.
Right, because as you mentioned, we kind of like expose the pre-existing concept of I think what's it called observers in Juggler.
Correct.
Uh, but what you're saying is that we should surface a more TypeScript, a more first-class support with event emitters at the repository level. You're saying.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I found this example. It was a nice article that I read. I will share with you. I don't have it on hand right now. I'm looking at it, but I will share it on the Slack channel. And and that is a nice example of how you can actually create events for a class. That's really adaptable to the repository. Right?
Yeah. So I'm actually curious, right? Because I think over the course of quite a number of maintenance calls, we have kind of brought up juggler, right? Because it's quite the elephant in the room. So I'm actually curious, how do we actually want to go about as in the long run, right? Like, do we want to refactor the existing code, or do we want to create a new code and then hopefully make it compatible with our connectors? Or, or is there some other idea that you may have in mind for that?
Okay, I would like to add something to that. Uh, there was actually probably there's an issue for rewriting juggler. I'm not sure if it's there, but there was an internal discussion among us, and then we realized that it would be a huge task. So we did not prioritize it at
Correct.
all. So so if we want to spend any effort on it, so probably it may be best to rewrite it, because although Juggler works well enough, there are areas where it needs to be refactored a lot, and we don't
Correct.
know how that refactoring process will affect other parts of Juggler. So we might as well rewrite the whole thing. That's what I
Mhm.
think. Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree with your points there because I've looked through the juggler code and I'm noticing a lot of pre-TypeScript conventions being used. So it's not as maintainable as say like the loopback for code base itself. I guess I do agree with your point of like potentially rewriting it. So we can keep the existing juggler as is for like full compatibility with
Yep.
all the CI and whatnot integrations as is. But
Mm.
then we create a new like next generation juggler and then we try to refine it over time. So um like we can provide the user the setting to like switch between both, right? Like so like do you want to use the new juggler or is there something breaking? Do you want to swap back to the old one kind of thing? So I
Right.
think that's a good intermediary. So you can like kind of progressively improve
Yep.
on the juggler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. That's the best approach, definitely. Not to modify the code, but create something new that can be compatible, for example, with this one. And at some point, right? I can't imagine right now at this point, but anyway, the main point is that we need, even we don't necessarily keep the juggler in the bottom, for example, right? We can use another type of ORM, for example, or even Prisma as the engine behind the scenes, and then we just create the middle that actually provides sustainable migration towards it, more or less. But I don't have any problems with the juggler. We have applications in productions; they're working fine using Postgres, MySQL, right? I'm not related so far with MongoDB until now. That I am just trying to find out what is the benefit of using that.
Mm.
And but at the end, I think that the only minor feature that we need to implement is these proxy methods, for example, that I don't want to execute arbitrary SQL statements. That's not safe. I just want to call the upstream, and then how we can do it without actually rewriting or updating the connectors, for example, how we can achieve that, right? And also the events at the repository level. So if we create something in the front that in the middle actually provides us compatibility, and then it doesn't really matter what we use in this, right?
Right.
Kind of like more or less, for example, like let's say that we implement the ORM as an extension point, and then Prisma type ORM, etc., can adhere to it. It's a major task, right? But as extensions, it's easy to talk, right? But can you
Yeah.
imagine that? I mean, wow, that can be amazing, right? We need
Yes.
100 refas. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that kind of leans into like how we kind of like structure our ORM integrations, right? Like for example, right now type ORM is it's called a level one integration because we still expose type ORM specific concepts, classes, and whatnot.
Yeah.
The next level is to like integrate it with seamlessly with the loopback for models and repositories.
Mm.
So uh, I guess because right now I think the problem that I'm seeing is that like uh, the current like the default CRUD repository and the default KV repository, it actually has quite a number of like internal functions that specifically do some special stuff for Juggler. And if we were to integrate, say like other ORM to use repository, we would need to create a new repository class, which means we have to like rebuild the has one repository or the has many true repository and whatnot. So I'm actually curious, what's the design choice for that? Like what's the plan on kind of like connecting these two together? One is the juggler repository, the other one's like everything else. How does that fit?
Well, the actual repository is not necessarily a juggler repository, right? It connects to the proxy, to the middleman, let's say, right? The middleware. Uh, I believe that our current repository can also be refactored in some point that it connects to the universal middleware, and then hence be able to be compatible with Prisma, for example, right? Or
Yeah.
or any other types. How do we achieve that? For example, we can do in different ways, but I believe and I love, for example, the way how it is structured in Loopback 4 as a framework. So we can follow the same principles as a extension points extension, for example, how we can modify how the repository class can be changed, for example, dynamically at some point, or it can be rebinding dynamically on the fly, depending upon to what middleware it will be talking about, right? What do you see? Do you see it feasible, Japa?
I think yeah, that's the ideal state we would like to be in. Achievable, but needs a lot of work.
Like, for example, instead of defining how we define the properties, for example, we can use this same definition at this moment, but this can be like the neutral way of defining things, for example,
Yes.
right?
Right.
To keep our code intact right now, and
Yeah.
then uh, the metadata, for example, is going to be altering the class depending upon what other options we give to it. If we are using Prisma, for example, it transforms it in a different way. So at
Right.
runtime, right?
Yeah.
Actually, now that you've kind of like elaborated more on it, I actually understand better on like what you're trying to, what's the idea you're trying to convey, and it actually does sound promising from an extension point of view. So we get to keep the existing default CRUD repository like at the surface level, but then underneath we add that new level of extensibility.
Yeah, it is a lot of work, right? And
Yeah.
actually, when we mentioned it to Raymond, he got excited because it's really Yeah, but it's a lot of work. He got excited because, for example, imagine that if we create that as an extension point extension and then modify the metadata injector on the fly, depending upon another tag like Prisma, Juggler, or whatever, then that follows the same principle as loopback, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, like for example, today I can create a loopback package just by creating a provider and installing that, right? And that's it. But at the end, you see, okay, so you are not using repositories, you are not using the data source connectors, you are actually reusing that provider in your controller class, which is fine, right? It actually solved the problem, and it's part of loopback architecture also. But if you want to see the contract of the repository models, the relationships, how you are executing that, then I, as a as an architect or as someone that designed these things, I don't want to actually have the spaghetti of seeing the providers being executed in the controller just like that, right? I don't have the visibility of my models, right? Now the problem is that, yeah, sadly, that's the same question that you say, right? Are we going to redesign it? Or we can start, for example, by putting the first block, which is uh, redesign only the middleware that at least exposes the methods to the connectors and somehow allows us to proxy certain methods that are being exposed by the original npm package so that
Yeah.
developers can still actually call directly that method, for example, and not be opaque by the middleware, right?
Hmm.
As a first approach. Like, for example, the Mongo user said, hey, look, MongoDB npm package has lb set, for example. I don't remember there is a lot of methods, right? lb set, okay. Now, okay, but we are not using that in the connector, right? Okay, you can actually execute that. What if at some point, in a type-safe way, we provide that functionality and still they be able to call through our connector lbset directly, for example,
Right.
because
Right.
it's already there, right, in the connector.
Yeah. That would be. Yeah. But how do we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Because
I will leave that to Rifa. You know, I just have the idea.
and I also want to have more time to work on Loopback 4 as well, but I'm juggling things left and right at this moment. So uh, I'm not able to prioritize as much time as I want to, but I of course still help the community where I can, and I am like looking at areas where we could potentially improve Loopback 4. I think while we discuss about like um, again the whole idea of adding an extension point inside the repository, so I think it's an ingenious idea actually because we provide as little breaking changes to the end user, but then we provide way more new opportunities to allow people to add their own ORMs much more easily without having to like build new repositories by themselves. Uh,
Correct.
so I think incrementally, we just need to first find like what's that first step that we want to do with repository. Like where can we add that? Where can we refactor it first, and then we can go forward from there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So juggler aside, right? Is there any interesting updates with regards to the Open JSF migration on the IBM side?
Um, I could not follow you, Rifa. Can you come again?
So is there any major any new updates with regards to the OpenJS Foundation?
Oh, okay.
Anything else that we may need to help with or anything?
Uh-huh. Okay, so I have no news actually. So it would be Diana who would have any news if she has.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Actually, she moved two repositories for testing purposes, right, to the new LoopBack IO. I looked them fine, but we have to ask her exactly what is the current status and if everything look good on the smoothing of these two repositories, when she's planning to move the rest, for example. But that's part of the migration, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that we can ask her on in the Slack channel maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm. And what is the status of your Prisma integration, Rifa?
Uh, yeah, so unfortunately, I had to put it on hold for now. As mentioned
Uh,
before, I am rushing projects from my end. So I
okay.
had to prioritize that, unfortunately. But of course, the code is there if anyone wants to continue the work that I'm doing. Of course, once I'm done with things over here at my end, I think after a few weeks, then I will have a lot more free time to continue focusing on LoopBack 4.
Yeah.
I
Excellent.
think, yeah, but majority of the tests are there. All the majority of the features are there. Just some like little things I want to incorporate in addition. So it's mostly complete. Just need to refine a bit.
Ah,
Okay. Okay. So right now your PR is there already. So we can pull out and play around with it.
Uh,
Is functional?
yeah, it should be functional. The only thing I'm missing is like writing like the example package for like the so-called end-to-end testing because of how Prisma works. I have to do some interesting things when it comes to importing the Prisma package. So I'm not 100% sure if it works,
Mhm.
but I've already written all the other tests for it. So if anything breaks, it's probably that area right there, the import
Okay.
Prisma.
Okay. We'll take a
Yeah.
look at it. I will take a
what
look at
about
that.
docs?
Sorry?
What about the docs? Have you written any docs for that?
The documentation, yeah, the PR itself includes the documentation for like how to use it and whatnot. So like, oh,
Mhm.
how do you like what does like what does like what new bindings does the extension add, or like
Okay.
how can you add middleware and whatnot? It's all in the documentation. So yeah, I think it's more
Okay.
yeah more or less 99% done.
Wow, great.
Excellent. We'll take a look at that.
Yeah. So though there is one like limitation as of right now, because I'm not like 100% familiar with Prisma, uh, but one thing that I'm not able to incorporate is like generating the loopback filters because Prisma doesn't expose the necessary types for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
how do
Yeah.
they do the filter? The filter, like, for example.
So like the filters. I mean, but I mean, I probably can find out how to like derive the filters if I spend a bit more time with it. But because like the way they design Prisma, they don't like expose as many typings as I hope to. The so yeah, I mean, then there may be a workaround for it. I have some ideas, but I need to test it out more before I like push it.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I really haven't had the time of reading something about Prisma yet, but I have read that it's really popular, for example, among other communities. They're
Yeah,
using that. Mhm.
it's surprisingly popular.
Yeah.
Probably
Okay,
because
okay.
yeah,
Okay, okay. So, well, okay, so right now that's the status of Prisma. We need somehow to figure out, for example, how to rewrite this something in the middle or probably touch the juggler, right? So that it can my main point is to find a solution for the methods that are being exposed in
Yes.
the somehow without rewriting the connector, for example, right?
Without
That's the only thing to provide up-to-date methods for the developers, for example, depending upon the upstream npm package, and that's it, right? And trying to incorporate something events in the repository level, uh, more or less. I think that that will help a lot. As I say before, I have nothing. I have no problem with the juggler itself, right? It's working fine in certain databases. Uh, the only major problem is that we need help from other people, right? That are using those connectors. It's really easy, but we don't have time. So we are calling
Yeah.
up more maintainers, right, to come in, jump in. Like for example, yeah, you don't have to be an expert. For example, I started using LoopBack without having any experience in JavaScript at all. For example, in Node.js, right? So I have been learning, but it just required to have motivation and passion to help us. So I'm calling the other people also to jump in, actually crash your code. We can help, update it, fix it. Like for example, we can expose. I think it was iRedis, the Redis connector. It doesn't expose right now pooling, right? But it's very easy. The upstream connector supports pooling, but we need to change a little bit our connector to expose these properties, right? And then magically it will support pooling, right? So,
Yeah.
but we need time, so we need help on that. And I really want to thank Rifa also to get involved and put back to the project, right? A lot of efforts. That's why I'm not kidding when I say we need 100 Rifas, right, to keep the project up to date. And I think that the basic framework architecture is the foundation is very good, very stable. It's a nice framework, but we need to keep aligned with the latest, right? With the latest versions of everything. On
Right.
top
yeah,
of that, we are not changing the foundation, right?
the foundations are great, right? Like the way it was architected meant that we can reuse a lot of things across like all of the
Correct.
different, which is honestly just wonderful. Like which means like once you know loop back for, you can just build a lot of things with it.
Exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, we've heard like we've heard like golden stories on people using loopback for in production. Just that it's not just that we don't really it's not really surfaced publicly as much. So it's not as easy to get as much more of the community traction as we could use.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So Japa, one question. You are not working on the framework like
No.
more times?
No. Currently, I'm not. I'm busy with other stuff right now.
Okay. Excellent.
yeah, so I have like a lot of ideas on like how we can extend and make the framework good even better, right? Like not only in terms of adding new features for the developers, but also in terms of providing security, right? Like providing visibility and integration with other security tools. And I have a lot of ideas on that, and at least within my organization, we are prototyping on some of these things, how viable they are, uh, and hopefully we would be able to release it sometime soon. I think I mentioned it a few times before. We actually have like a CLI framework built on top of Loopback 4. We're still trying to figure out like what are the different components we should like expose that's just right for CLIs. Because like CLIs, it gets kind of interesting because there's a lot of like different ways you can get input, and there's a lot of ways you can pass it. So we're still trying to fine tune that balance, but I hope sometime we can actually bring it to LoopBack 4. And then so LoopBack 4, not only can you build web APIs, you can build CLIs with it as well.
Correct.
So we,
That
yeah,
got me
so
wondering what kind of CA tool it would be.
well, the idea is to give the same, familiar experience, right? Like, oh, you have the get decorators, and then you can do like the JSON schema validation and whatnot. We're trying to like do that as well with our CLI, with our like internal CLI framework, and through that we can like across all of our code bases, whether it's web API, CLIs, it's the same feeling, so that we're all familiar with it. But, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, that would be great to see.
Yeah, looking forward to see the details about that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Hopefully we've mastered the craft for it soon. Because apparently building CLI frameworks isn't as easy. Because like, oh, things keep changing because requirements like, oh, this one will be better, that one will be better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's changing quite a lot still.
Okay. So that's enough for me. Uh, that's the only thing that I wanted to talk about, and again, I'm calling the other maintainers to actually put at least 1 hour a week for this project, right? To
Yes.
try to help us. There is a lot of things to change. One of the things, for example, that I usually do is that what I always for to actually fix the package is whenever we build the data source, for example, we create let's say a data source for MySQL, right? It's imperative that I just need to add this stop uh, because it's part of the life cycle observer, so you need to add the stop, right? And it's not automatically done in the CLI. It's very simple. I mean, just add this in the template, right? Why? Because I have tested that if the application is terminated somehow, I even tested with using the Docker Kubernetes, for example, whenever you just stop one of the pods or using your npm start, your connection to the database are still there, right? It's not going to be in production. That's a good problem, a big problem, right? Because it will actually remain a lot of connections in database, and if your application somehow crashes constantly, then the database is going to be sit down. So that's one little change that needs to be done at the CLI, right? Add this stop disconnect whenever it's a data source that really needs to call disconnect, for example. I always copy paste that, but I really forgot to put it. Do you understand that? I mean, I think it's really necessary. What do you think, Japa? I mean, for
Yeah,
the data
I
source.
totally agree. Not just that, there are numerous other small things which can make give our users a better user experience.
Mhm.
We just need to put in time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Also, another important things, data source wise, is actually retouch the code for the where clauses, for example, that whenever we call the delete all, right? Most of the people, whenever they call the controller, LB4 controller, and they put something like that, they think that that's really the code that they need, for example, right? And I encourage the people that to remove from the controller everything that is not really needed for their use case, right? The template is a general template, so you need to analyze what is your use case for that controller and remove everything that is not really needed, right? Because I have seen complaints that they just leave, for example, the delete all and things like that, right? and then boom, all their data in production. Imagine that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, I guess it's very much a real concern, right? Like some of these things, you look back for, it's really powerful, but then it expects you to be to know, right? To actually read the code and understand what's going to happen. I guess that those are like areas we could also improve on. Like for example, delete all, make an explicit flag to enable it, or something like that. Because what's the chances that you really need to delete every single thing, right?
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and the documentation right now is pretty well. I think that if someone is interested in knowing the framework, goes to the documentation, they will see getting started, what is loopback for, how it works, for example. But people sometimes don't read, right? They just go straight and use the framework.
Yeah,
So, for instance, there was one of the developers was actually raising an issue about timing out of the data source. And I read the full thing just to find out that he was trying to load the data source by itself, binding the data source by himself, for example, in the application before the rest actually was taking place. So, and this is done by the booter, right? Which in terms calls the data source booter automatically for us, right? So very simple,
Mm.
but that creates bad experience, right? So people should actually read before actually going into the framework. Just like jumping in the swimming pool without knowing how to swim, right? You're gonna get drowned.
yeah. When I started learning loopback 4, I was kind of guilty of that too. I just read the framework. Okay, I'm gonna do
You
something
see?
with the framework.
Yeah.
Like
The thing
this
is, for
task.
example, like uh, yeah, loopback is very powerful. Very powerful. It's a general framework. People sometimes say, "Hey, look, I use framework ABC that I just with 3 command lines I have something." Yes, you can do that in loopback 4, but you have to understand how the framework works. What is the architecture behind? At least the notion, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't mess up.
I think
Yeah.
one of the things is that because of the different dynamics with the Node.js ecosystem, because if maybe if you pass a loopback for esque framework into like Java, right, Spring Boot, people will be very familiar with dependency injection, IOC providers, and class based
Mhm.
programming in general, right? So they would be more familiar with these kind of things. But in Node.js, we kind of like it's kind of like a paradigm that isn't as familiar, though gaining popularity in some frameworks. Uh,
Yeah.
I think Loopback 4 is especially maybe quote unquote more difficult because like it exposes way more APIs for the users to play with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe yeah. Maybe what we need is like maybe some articles to like explore some weird features of Loopback 4, see like the use cases and whatnot. Because some of these things are really powerful APIs, but it may not be so apparent to developers who have not had the chance to experience why these APIs exist and like why they could be useful.
Yeah.
So many developers, including myself back then when I was still learning Loopback for way back when, it's like, why there's so many APIs? Why there's like so many parameters, right? So
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting thing to explore. But then of course goes back to the idea that we need time to write such things, right?
Yeah. Like, I just want to add something. Like, for example, the last time, a couple of weeks, I was involved in a specific group and with Node.js, and the majority of the people, new programmers, what they all they wanted was, okay, I want to connect to a database, I want to expose a controller, and then they didn't know about loopback for. But their main question was, how do we actually double check the parameters that are being sent to the function using Express, for example? How do we parse that? how do we connect to database? Where is going to be executed? Can you imagine if they will just know, for example, how it is easy in LoopBack for, right?
Yeah.
So 60% of the newcomers into the Node.js ecosystem has that problem, right? They
Yeah.
have that problem, right? How to parse it? Where's and LoopBack 4 does it almost, seamlessly. So
Yeah.
this is a very powerful framework. So we just need to focus on trying to keep aligned with the foundation and keep up with the latest trend, and that's it, right? So that's why again we need help from other people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all for me. I just need to go, I guess.
Yeah. I think this was a really good conversation, from the juggler to documentation to and then everything else in between. Yeah.
Okie dokie.
All right.
Okay,
So anything else to discuss?
That's it.
that's it. Thank you, Yapa,
Okay.
for Yapa is retired already, but put a lot of works also on the framework. So thank you very much. You helped me a lot in the past, right? When I was a newcomer
Yeah.
also.
I'll continue to contribute whenever possible. So
Yeah,
not ready to
yeah.
retire.
Just try to do that. Otherwise, I challenge you to compete. I am a jiu-jitsu black belt, and you are a taekwondo black belt. So if you don't
Are
come
you
and
really
help us,
this is a black
yes.
belt?
Huh?
Really? This is a black belt?
Yeah, jiu-jitsu. Uh-huh.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, I started my karate career when I was 11 years old, right?
Mm.
I will not tell you my years old, uh, but I was 11, right? It was Kempo karate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but then 10 years ago, more or less, I started with the jiu-jitsu journey.
Wow, that's great. Black belt in beaches is a really big deal.
Yeah, yeah, I know. You know, it's been it took me 10 years more or less, right? 10 years.
Yeah, right,
I'm
right.
not, and I don't consider myself an expert on that. You can beat me. Yeah.
Oh, that's the attitude.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Japa. Thank you, Rifa, for your time. All right.
All
Okay,
right.
so thanks Mario, thanks Rifa. See you next time.
Thanks,
Okay,
Yapa.
guys.
Thanks,
Take
Mario.
care.
All right.
All right.
Take care.